we could only compare in relation to 2014, and they only gained 2 percentage points, from 6 to 8%. And so why the poor performance of the ANC? It was mainly around issues to do with turnout in the ANC strongholds. That is why you had word PR dissonance. ANC, I think, won most of the wards in PE, but still went below 50%. But this is what we need to internalize. That stay away was not accidental. It was an expression of protest about, one, candidate selection processes, and secondly, and I'm talking about things that emerge from research, secondly, due to corruption and state capture, particularly at national level, which have sullied brand ANC. I would venture even to make the point, and may her soul rest in peace, at the first session in Gauteng, or rather in Johannesburg, one of our comrades died because she just couldn't believe what had happened. I would venture to say Comrade Pakstau and his comrades in Johannesburg were not punished for what they did or did not do. Research pointed that the problem comes from elsewhere. They were being punished for something else. And so the question, shall we be able to re-energize the ANC base, the ANC supporters, or will a stay away become a stop station towards the opposition parties? That is the major challenge that we have to address in the build-up to 2019. And what has happened since the August elections, I should say, perhaps not encouraging, but perhaps encouraging. It's contradictory in the following sense. You might have heard this on talk shows. Those who didn't come out to vote do not have what some refer to as the Brexit hangover. If you went to the UK after the Brexit referendum, some people were saying, but did we do the right thing? Some were regretting. Supporters of the ANC who didn't come out are not regretting. And they are saying, if you do not correct these weaknesses that are there in the ANC, wait for 2019 and we'll punish you even more. This is a message from the mass of the people. And if we're talking about social agency and what we need to do as this collective and others, is to ensure that we indeed correct those weaknesses. There are related political dynamics to the things that I have said, which I will briefly reflect on. The shifting of politics to the left might start to tempt the ANC to cover its left flank. And in my view, this is a philosophical and existential question for the ANC. A temptation to out-EFF the EFF, people who have no responsibility and who are not governing anyway. In my view, yes, we should implement our resolutions about radical economic transformation. And in that context, our responsibility is to ensure meticulous implementation of the National Development Plan. If we did, unemployment would be down to 6% by 2030. inequality, provision of housing. We can talk about many other indicators. We will be moving closer and closer to the society envisaged in the Freedom Charter. Some have posed the question, does the division that has happened in COSATU and the expulsion of NUMSA, departure, am I right, of FAO and so on, do all those things presage a fundamentally tectonic shift in the country's political permutations? I suppose this depends at the political level on the organizational capacity of those forces, the United Front. And in my view, they are very good at shop floor organization. I'm not quite certain that community organization is their strong point. If I'm not mistaken, the United Front, which is meant to be very strong in PE, where you have the motor industry, could only muster 0.8% of the votes in Nelson Mandela Bay, that is. And so going forward, arising out of the local government elections, yes, the ANC will need to learn and act as an efficient opposition. Demonstrate that in reality, the DA is incapable of meeting the needs of the poorest of the poor. I was saying to some comrades, come December, the DA likes coming out with, what are they called, scorecards for departments, ministers, and this and the other. I was saying to some comrades, why don't we do the same? In Johannesburg, Tshwane, Nelson Mandela Bay, and they might in fact score 0. Are taking undocumented migrants, and some accident happens in Pretoria that seems to be the focus of the mayor of Johannesburg as to how he's transforming the conditions of life of the people of Johannesburg. One doesn't get a sense at all. But what we should also keep in mind, especially for those in government going forward, is that the DA has been and will continue digging up debt where they are now located to try and perpetuate the narrative that the ANC is corrupt. So we need to exercise care wherever we're working, not to have any debt that anyone can dig up later. EFF, one expects them to grandstand, and my own assessment is that from time to time, from place to place, this might result in paralysis. As an opposition in those various municipalities, we need to be sharp in understanding the tactical situation and ensuring that we take advantage of these developments. If there was any major worry, to exaggerate a bit, it is that the DA's incursion reminds one of colonialism. Started in the Cape of Good Hope. and then moved into the hinterland. Now you have Nelson Mandela Bay, discovery of gold there in Joburg, and so on and so forth. And to top it all, you have a Vasco da Gama as a Speaker of the Council of Johannesburg. As all this happens, one was then reminded of what Machindra used to discuss in the camps, what we used to learn from Comrade Mark Shope and Jack Simons in Novo Katenga. Why were we defeated during the colonial days? Amongst others, the technological superiority of the colonizers. Perhaps that does not necessarily apply today. Unity of the African people, and we need to ask ourselves the question, especially as the ANC, is it not our divisions that make these incursions possible? Comrade Jack and Comrade Mark also taught us about abo nongause, people who do wrong things. And idiomatically today tell us to kill our cattle, destroy our brand identity, because miraculously something good will come out of it. And so if we have learned from those lectures in the camps, we need to ensure that amongst the issues that we should say as part of our mission is to strengthen unity, to weaken and destroy the capacity of abongause in our midst. I will not go into detail on the global situation and how it impacts on us, but just to indicate a few issues that we need to keep in mind. Change in the global balance of forces economically. China, the second largest economy, it's reconfiguring its economy. India might, in the relay race, become one of the locomotives of global growth. We know that Donald is taking over in January in the US, and this might worsen global tension and inequality. But ironically, if he implements his program for fiscal spending for infrastructure, we might find a situation in which it's a right-winger who implements Keynesian policies. But one issue that is starting to emerge very clearly is that because of inequality, because of marginalization of the majority of the people, the 99%, the political and economic establishment in the Western countries is starting to lose legitimacy. That is why you find the Labour Party being taken by, should I call him a lefty, Comrade Ronnie, Jeremy Corbyn. That is why you had Bernie Sanders in the Democratic Party in the US. That's why you have Syriza in Greece and so on. But at the same time, if we can remember the lectures in the camps, in a period of crisis, you will have that tendency, but you will also have the tendency of movement towards the right. In fact, as we'll remember, Second World War was a product of the global economic crisis, or the economic crisis of the 30s. So you have Brexit and the results in the US, and a near miss where someone closely linked to the Nazis nearly won the Austrian presidential elections. They said rightward shift also in Latin America. As we are aware, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and so on. Discussing with comrades, the tendency sometimes is to say this is a consequence of the intervention of the imperialist powers. Maybe there might be an element of that, but the additional issue, which is an important lesson for us, is that what is happening in some of those countries in Latin America is self-inflicted by those left forces. The acts of corruption created the opportunity for the right-wing forces. And so in South Africa itself, you can stand on rooftops and talk about imperialism, regime change. If you yourselves create opportunity for the opportunists, they will take the opportunity. In my view, with regard to the continent, the Africa Rising narrative is still relevant. Growth in sub-Saharan Africa this year might be about 1.6%, but the 9 non-oil producing countries are still doing quite well. Rwanda, Kenya, and a few others, Ivory Coast. The important thing for me here is that in relation to this narrative of Africa rising, South Africa needs to find creative ways of taking advantage of those opportunities. Southeast Asia grew together as those countries did because of what some refer to as mutually beneficial osmosis. How do we ourselves, as a growth laggard on the continent, ensure that we benefit from Africa's growth? And there are many things that we can take advantage of. Amongst others, we are fortunate, naturally, located in the middle between East and West on the South, can become a transshipment hub, a marine servicing center. One can go on and on. But let me come back to the domestic macro-social trends as I move towards conclusion. One has said all these things, but perhaps we need to make the point, which sometimes it's easy to forget. Our polity, our political system is a stable and legitimate one, and the Constitution enjoys the support of the overwhelming majority of our people. In the 2014 elections, 93% of the voters supported parties that embrace the National Development Plan. Not that there is one determinant as to how people vote, but at least the correlation is a good one. We have made progress in addressing poverty and providing services, but we face challenges of the quality of the services as well as the major challenge of inequality, with the second, if not the highest indicator of income inequality in the world, the so-called Gini coefficient. And young people bear the brunt of that marginalization. Interestingly, this is starting to impact also on young professionals who face a glass ceiling and an alien culture where they are employed, even if they might be earning huge sums of money. And the hashtag fees must fall movement is not unrelated to this. Amongst others, they are waking us up about that second phase of the transition to a national democratic society. But these things are not new. Inequality has always been there. There are fewer people who are poor. And historically, since 1994, as the ANC, legitimate and confident, we were able to manage that delicate balancing act of preventing that flammable social tinder of inequality and marginalization from catching fire. We were able to convince our people It might be in the next village or across the railway line that electricity and potable water have arrived, but be patient. And indeed, hope was one of the stocks in trade that sustained our people and their confidence in the ANC. But if we start to perform poorly, if from reports, court judgments, reports of the public protector and so on, manifestations of corruption hit our people in the face, they also destroy that hope. And the social tinder will catch fire. And when there is a sense that the central authority is unable to exercise that authority and doesn't enjoy legitimacy, the social tinder will catch fire. Sometimes there won't be direct links between things that happen and that reality of a declining legitimacy. And by the way, when our people complain about corruption, sometimes it's because it hits them directly. A case in point. If we were to look at those monies that were spent in Nkandla, we are not saying who is responsible and guilty and so on, but the monies, those funds were taken from a program in DPW, Department of Public Works, that was supposed to deal with dolomite in Gauteng and inner city rejuvenation in Johannesburg. So it was money meant for the poor. In Muthutlung, Brits, we might be aware, 2014, there was a demonstration about water. One person died just before the elections. Why no water in Brits? The pipes are there. The water had been there. Later, when the investigation was conducted, it was discovered that some of the bureaucrats and the politicians, the councillors, had deliberately sabotaged the water reticulation system so they could get the water vendors to deliver trucks of water and they get a cut from that. Direct impact of corruption on the mass of our people. And so when they respond in the elections, it's not because they are theorizing. It's what they actually experience. And so when we say we need to get rid of corruption, it's not only about theory and about the fact that it challenges sense and sensibility and morality and ethics of the ANC. It's also because of the impact that it has on the mass of our people. Now the danger is that when the social tinder threatens to catch fire, manifests in various ways, the danger is that the security agencies can then become the first and last line of defense. We end up depending on the security forces rather than on social delivery, on exercising our authority and legitimacy. In other words, if the narrative about corruption and the reality that is demonstrated all the time continues, if delivery slows down, the legitimacy of the state and the polity will be undermined. And it won't be the first time in post-colonial countries that this happens. And in many of them, started with the leader, then the party, then the government, and ultimately the state as such. And in many of the African countries where this happened, you had coups because the military was then saying, we have to restore order. In South Africa, that is not possible. Here, what would happen is that the ANC will lose elections when that chain of delegitimization has manifested itself. So where will the turnaround come from? In society and in the ANC. Starting with broader society, in my view, the National Development Plan should be the basis of that turnaround. It requires a state that has got strategic, ideational, organizational, and technical capacity, a capable developmental state that can lead all of society. And to be legitimate, you also have to be ethical. It requires a social compact with the business community to ensure that they do not operate on the basis of short-termism and that they invest in the country. It requires a social compact with civil society, workers, and perhaps it might not be an issue or an issue directly for MK, but I think many of you also came from the trade union movement, that it is a tragedy what is happening in COSATU. To lose the largest union, to have factionalism that undermines the voice of workers. What you will remember in one of the January 8th statements, O.R. Tambo then referred to as a fight amongst the powerless for power over one another. The social compact should, as we are saying, include civil society. And whether we may differ with some of them or not, insofar as their public pronouncements are concerned, I would argue that many of the civil society structures that are complaining and seeking to act against the wrong things that are happening are driven by the national interest. Because the question does arise. Developmental states were strong, they led, and in a situation in which the state is weak and seems directionless, should society throw its hands up in despair? In my view, social agency also means that they should act in pursuit of the interest of the country, and by doing that, they will strengthen the healthy elements and narrow the space for the scoundrels. What about a turnaround in the ANC? Social compacting that I'm referring to might sound like a new concept. When we were announcing where people were trained, I thought I saw Comrade Tabang raising his hand. This was not military training. Political education in Bulgaria, where you had amongst their major focus areas in political education was Georgy Dimitrov and the principle of a united front. The ANC in its history has been a leader of such united fronts for liberation and for social transformation. But a strange thing has started happening. A broad front for good or broad fronts for good are emerging out there in society against corruption and all kinds of things. The ANC is floating somewhere outside of those broad fronts. The ANC is being marginalized by the broad fronts of people who want genuine transformation. Who do you blame? The people. A vanguard that is unable to exercise its vanguard role might in fact be starting to experience its death.